Hello everyone, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you would like updates when more videos are posted. The previous video on secondary leading tone chords focused on how to identify and label secondary leading tone chords with the appropriate Roman numeral. This video will focus on the traditional voice leading of the secondary leading tone chords to their likely destination chords. It is not an exhaustive look at the voice leading possibilities of the diminished seventh chord. The topic is presented here through the prism of the curricular goals of my undergraduate theory class. Just like secondary and primary dominant chords, secondary and primary leading tone chords behave similarly to each other. Thus, the voice leading will be mostly the same for primary and secondary leading tone chords. However, before focusing on the voice leading, let us briefly review the features of primary and secondary leading tone chords. They will either be a diminished triad, a half diminished seventh chord, or a fully diminished seventh chord. And the chordal root of the leading tone chord will likely be a minor second below the chordal root of the likely destination chord. For example, look at the primary, the diatonic example below in the key of C minor. The leading tone chord is a fully diminished seventh chord in first inversion. The chordal root is the B natural and resolves to a chord whose root is a minor second above B, which would be C. The main difference between primary and secondary leading tone chords is that the secondary leading tone chord will involve at least one note that is foreign to the key. While the primary leading tone seventh chord does involve chromaticism, the raised scale degree 7, as you can see with the B natural in this example, that note falls within the harmonic minor scale and isn't considered foreign necessarily to the key of C minor. Look at the example below, also within the key of C minor. First, we need to identify and label the given chromatic sonority. We will review this process now, but it's worth reviewing my video on identifying and labeling secondary leading tone chords, a link which is appearing in the top right corner of your screen now. First, ask yourself, is the given chromatic chord a diminished triad, a half diminished seventh chord, or a fully diminished seventh chord? If the answer is yes, as is the case here, in fact it's a fully diminished seventh chord in first inversion, it is likely a secondary leading tone chord. Then determine the chordal root of the given sonority, which in this example is the E natural. Then determine the pitch a minor second above E, which would be F. Finally, F is the chordal root of what chord within the given key? F is the root of the 4 chord in the key of C minor. Therefore, the proper label of the given chromatic chord is 7 fully diminished 6/5 of 4. Now for the voice leading. For the sake of comparison, the primary leading tone chord from the previous slide has been included to illustrate that the voice leading steps in most circumstances will be the same regardless of whether you are resolving a primary or secondary leading tone chord. However, the audio that you will hear will be that of the secondary leading tone chord. First, resolve the chordal seventh down by step, which has been our standard practice regarding the resolution of all seventh chords so far. In the primary leading tone chord example, the chordal seventh is the A flat and is moving down by step to G. In the secondary leading tone chord example, the chordal seventh is the D flat in the alto voice moving down by step to C. Next, resolve the leading tone or temporary leading tone up by step. In the primary leading tone chord example, the leading tone is the B natural in the soprano voice and will likely move up by step to C. In the secondary leading tone chord example, the temporary leading tone is the E natural in the soprano voice and is likely to move up by step to F. If you're slightly unsure of what constitutes the temporary leading tone, it will always be the chordal root of the secondary leading tone chord. Or you can think of it as the leading tone to the likely destination chord. In this example, the chordal root of the likely destination chord is F. Therefore, the temporary leading tone is a half step below, E natural. Notice that completing voice leading steps 1 and 2 results in a chordal root and a chordal fifth of the likely destination chord in both examples. This allows for the last step. Move the remaining 2 voices by step to double the chordal third of the likely resolution chord. It is worth mentioning that the same solution occurs when resolving the tritones as expected. A diminished fifth interval resolving inward to a third, while an augmented fourth interval resolving outward to a sixth. It is worth making a few additional points. The voice leading steps just covered for the secondary leading tone fully diminished seventh chord would be the same for the secondary leading tone chords that are half diminished seventh chords as well. This was also true of primary leading tone chords. However, it is worth noting that the leading tone fully diminished seventh chord is more common, the two tritones intensifying directionality to the expected resolution, while the sonority symmetry, perhaps incongruently, offers greater flexibility and opportunities to surprise. More on this latter point in a later video, however. Perhaps most importantly, the resulting doubled chordal third of the destination chord needs to be revisited. To review, check out my video on primary leading tone diminished seventh chords, where I mentioned that the fully diminished seventh chord in root position, for the purposes of my class, can resolve to a destination chord with a doubled chordal root, allowing for a slight modification to the last voice leading step. Move the remaining two voices by step to double the chordal third or chordal root of the resolution chord. Both solutions can be seen in example number 1 below, which shows a primary leading tone chord in the key of C minor. Notice the two viable solutions. One illustrates moving the final two voices by step to double the chordal root, while the other shows moving the final two voices by step to double the chordal third. This exception will also pertain to the voice leading of secondary leading tone chords that are fully diminished seventh chords in root position, as seen in example number 2, which is the same secondary leading tone chord of the subdominant, the 4 chord, that we encountered earlier, but revoiced to appear in root position. Notice that the voice leading for both the primary and secondary leading tone chords are the same. The chordal sevenths of both examples 1 and 2 are still resolving down by step. In primary example number 1, this would be the A flat moving down by step to G, and in the secondary example of number 2, the chordal seventh is the D flat moving down by step to C. Also, the leading tone and temporary leading tone are resolving up by step. In example number 1, the B natural is moving up by step to C. In example number 2, the temporary leading tone is the E natural resolving up by step to F. Notice again that after voice leading steps 1 and 2, you are left with a destination chord with a chordal root and a chordal fifth. Lastly, since we are resolving a root position fully diminished seventh chord, we have two viable options. We can move the remaining two voices by step to double the chordal third or the chordal root. This voice leading exception becomes particularly significant when considering the secondary leading tone fully diminished seventh chord of 5, the dominant, which presents several voice leading quandaries. Below you will see two different voicings of the secondary leading tone fully diminished seventh chord of 5. If we resolve the tritones as expected and double the chordal third of the likely destination chord, we will have made the mistake of doubling the leading tone. So our best option in many cases will be to move the remaining two voices by step to double the chordal root of the 5 chord to avoid the doubled leading tone. This will result in a tritone between E flat and A, an augmented fourth in example number 1, and a diminished fifth in example number 2, not to resolve as expected. But composers didn't always feel it necessary to resolve the tritones as anticipated, especially when presented with less appealing voice leading options like a doubled leading tone. It is worth mentioning that depending on the textbook being used in your class, the unequal fifths in the upper voices of example number 2 may be discouraged. However, in my video tutorials, we are mainly concerned with avoiding unequal fifths involving the bass voice. Now listen to the following excerpt from a Bach chorale. The phrase is in the key of D major, and most of the harmony is diatonic to the key. However, there are two harmonies that contain notes foreign to the key of D major, the sonority on beat 1 of the first full measure and again on beat 3 of the same measure. The A sharp in the bass voice is outside the key. When you encounter a chord that contains chord tones outside the key, and to determine if the chord is a secondary leading tone chord, ask yourself if the given sonority is a diminished triad, a half-diminished seventh chord, or a fully diminished seventh chord. If need be, take pitch inventory of the given chord and stack the notes in closed position until you determine which note is the chordal root. With the example on beat 1 of measure 1, we find that the chordal root is the A sharp in the bass voice, and the sonority is a diminished triad with a diminished seventh above the chordal root, making the chord a fully diminished seventh chord. We can now write 7 fully diminished 7 Roman numeral with a slash. However, what Roman numeral follows the slash? Go up a half step from the temporary leading tone, which is also the chordal root of the fully diminished seventh chord, the A sharp. A half step above A sharp is B. B is the root of the sixth chord in the key of D major. Therefore, the chord is properly labeled as 7 fully diminished 7 of 6. Follow the same process for the chromatic chord on beat 3. We will also find that this chord is also a fully diminished seventh chord in root position. The G sharp in the bass voice is the chordal root. A half step above G is A. A is the chordal root of the 5 chord in the key of D major. Therefore, the harmony is labeled as 7 fully diminished 7 of 5. Notice that in both examples, the chordal sevenths are resolving down by step and the temporary leading tones are resolving up by step. Also notice that the remaining two voices are moving by step to double the chordal root, not the chordal third. This highlights the exception just discussed regarding the doubling of the destination chord when resolving fully diminished seventh chords in root position. The augmented fourths between the tenor and alto voices are moving down by step to a perfect fourth interval, instead of moving as perhaps expected outward by step to form a sixth. This motion of the augmented fourth to a perfect fourth between the tenor and alto voices in this example allows Bach to avoid doubling the leading tone, the C sharps, when moving to the dominant. While the Bach example illustrated the secondary leading tone chord of 5 moving directly to 5, we know from previous study that the motion to 5 can be delayed through the cadential 6/4, just like any other predominant chord that progresses to 5. Notice that the sonority on beat 4 of example number 2, the 5 chord, is the exact same 5 chord on beat 3 of example number 1, except for the bass note which has moved down an octave. Just like many predominant chords moving to the 5 chord through the cadential 6/4, move scale degree 6 or the chromatic alteration of scale degree 6, as is the case here, down by step to create the typical doubled bass note of the cadential 6/4. The remaining two voices will usually complete the cadential 6/4 sonority by stepwise motion, or sustaining through common tone scale degrees 1 and 3, as is the case in this example. In the examples below, first label the given sonorities with the proper Roman numeral, then resolve to the likely destination chord. The answers will be provided in the following video. Thank you very much for watching, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel.